Fertilizer costs have risen 45% per acre for corn and 60% for soybeans just since 2020.
What the heck happened in 1971? Productivity and hourly wages always went up together, but then in 1971, something happened. Wages began to stagnate while productivity has continued to go up, and that's just the start. The price of a Campbell soup can was 10 cents for the longest time, but since 1971, it has skyrocketed to now over 120 per can. And get this, before 1971, it took you around 2 years to save for a house, but now it takes 7. The top 1% of earners have continued to see their income grow since 1971, but the bottom 90% has not. And look how many countries have had a banking crisis since 1971. Since 1971, the US national debt has gone completely vertical. Same with healthcare costs, and oddly enough, we've had a massive growth of administrators while the amount of physicians has stayed flat. And just look how the American diet has changed since 1971. Less beef and potatoes and way more corn and chicken. This one's crazy. Look at the global production of vegetable oil since 1971. Obesity among young children was 5% in 1971, but now it's over 20%. Even the number of prisoners has skyrocketed since 1971. Unfortunately, people are getting married later too. In 1971, the average age was around 23, but now it's closer to 30. The prices of electricity, food, and fruit have all dramatically gone up since 1971 too. In 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard, meaning the US dollar was no longer backed by gold. And since then, things have gotten a lot worse. What do you think about all this? And don't get me started on shrinkflation.
Well, what do I think? Well, I think his video proves a lot of what we talk about on this channel. What you're seeing here on your screen is a returns from 50% corn, 50% soybeans. This was in central Illinois, measured, I think, by Illinois State. You can see the map to the left, the chart where they measured this, and then you can see the profits and losses. Now, I've often stated on this channel that after about 2013, it just kind of farming just died, and I've proved it through charts, etc. So hopefully you guys have been paying attention to the video series. Now this chart is in central Illinois, but it's pretty indicative of your main corn and soybean growing areas ranging from like southern Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana. They're statistically going to be very similar. And you can see the greens obviously means you made money that year and how much money you made. Then the reds are loss years. So the two first loss years would have been 13 and 14. And you can see the current loss years towards the right side of the chart. I believe that chart ended in 2024. 2025 would also be a loss year, and it's possibly looking like 2026 would be. Now, this chart, again, is very indicative of your Midwest corn growing areas. So you can gauge kind of what years you made money and what years you didn't. As I've talked about on this channel many times, 2000 to 2012 had a much better percentage returns than we currently do now. So I literally took the tops of the charts, I cut the top off and added it to the lows. Cut the top off, added it to the lows. So I kept everything in percentage the same as it was. And you can clearly see on this chart, this is a modified version of what you just saw. See how much higher it is on the left side of the screen than the right side? It pretty much proves after 2012 that the margin on a consistent basis dropped significantly. Farm equipment parts have risen nearly 70% since 2020. So as you can tell, the video started that we've had a rise in fertilizer prices, we've had a rise in home expenses, rise in parts and equipment. Literally everything has increased in price that you purchase, while commodities haven't. Further proof that inflation lingers and commodity prices do not inflation adjust. This chart's off of grain markets and stuff. Joe on that show built this chart, and it shows the grain price and the CPI. And as you can see, the two lines, one being the CPI, one being the grain price, you can see how the lines literally lay over top of each other at the exact same time, proving that when you have a shortage of grain or a shortage of commodities, that is inflationary. This also comes at a time of currency devaluation due to excessive currency creation. And again, you can see that CPI, which measures the change of inflation, doesn't measure how much inflation you've had long term, it just measures the change in inflation. And you can see how the grain price follows it exactly, or it follows the grain price. Either which way you want to look at it. The problem is the actual inflation hangs on while the inflation rate declines to a precursor level. Taking a look at Farm Doc Daily here from Illinois. Again, they show another chart of inflation rate, and grain prices, corn prices. And as you can clearly see, sideways, and we had a very large tick up in the grain price, and we have a very large tick up in the, I'm sure that's the CPI. And then you have, a downtrend, and you have a downtrend. I mean, shortages literally are inflation. I mean, that's when there's a shortage or there's more demand for the product, and maybe there's not enough of the product, and you got a lot of money chasing the product, you end up at times of inflation. So you can see how they overlap. Again, that just measures the change of inflation. It doesn't mean that the inflation or the price of what you're paying for goods came back down. It just means that maybe the grain came back down, this came back down. The problem has been that when this goes up, the price of your tractor goes up, and it doesn't come down very much, then it goes up even farther. So you end up with a line that's, gets farther and farther apart from that grain price. And if you guys have been paying attention to the video series, and including this video, what are you learning here? You're learning that too much money chasing too few goods, usually commodity driven, is usually where your times you get the most inflation. And you're learning that domestic currency devaluation is what leads to prolonged higher prices in domestic things you buy, while at the same time on a global level, such as grains, they really don't inflation adjust. And that just further explains why your new tractor, you can't afford it. Further explains why your grain prices, long-term wise, are completely stagnant. It explains why places like Brazil have geared up to produce more grains. Yes, you can have a money supply expansion and actually have long-term deflation in your grains. That is a thing, and it happens regularly, and it's happening right now. And it's been happening for multiple years. And we're proving here in this video, plus the others, that long term, I mean, the industry, agriculture, the industry, real crop farming, the margins aren't there. Well, the margins aren't there because, again, you had inflation. This is just inflation rate. It doesn't mean, you got to start looking at a line that goes up like this and this, while the grain has pretty much just stayed sideways. Just cut your margin more and more and more. And people wonder why John Deere goes off to Mexico. Well, what if they didn't? What if they stayed here and they wanted to have a certain percentage of returns? And corporations often work that way. They're going to turn a certain percent, or they're going to close the doors. They're not going to be like a farmer who's going to eat rice and beans and just do whatever it takes to get to the bitter end. They look at production costs, and then, they wouldn't sell anything here if it was even higher priced. So they have to find cost-cutting measures while at the same time enticing investment. Get my screen to kick back on here. One of the reasons that happens, and one of the things that's occurring to cause that happen, here's macro trends. We look at corn prices all the time, and you can see right here at 15 to 20, a pretty suppressed time in the corn market where we literally just traded a sideways, narrow, lousy, no profit band, and no profit by margins, what I'm talking about, which would be reflected in the Illinois charts I showed earlier in margins. And one of the reasons we've had that happen, and one of the reasons we have this whole thing happen, because if you look at that same time frame, about right in here through here, you look at the dollar, you can see a time frame, did nothing but increase. Did nothing but long-term increase. Now, that doesn't mean your dollar bought more. What it means is your dollar's value, the dollar index, against other currencies. It meant that your currency gained value against other currencies, but here at home in the United States, your dollar actually lost buying capacity. So as your dollar loses buying power here, you can buy less with your dollar on a continuous basis. But on a global scale, meaning what it would do if you went and bought something from another country, it rose. Well, when it goes up, that means a foreigner wanting to buy our grain has to pay more of their money. The exchange rate. So it gives us the ability to import stuff cheaper, which can cause some longer term deflation. And it also, how to word it best, money is debt. And when you issue debt, you have to have somebody willing to take the debt. Well, obviously, there's a lot of people willing to run to the dollar. Well, one of the reasons they run to our debt or our money is because it's a stable source of returns. It's an investment strategy. It's a stable source of return. They buy it because they know that we're good for it, and they're going to protect that. The central bank's going to protect that. Unfortunately, exporting becomes difficult. That kills off manufacturing. To stabilize this currency against other currencies, even though, like I said, even though it's dropping in what it has for buying power here, doesn't buy shit here at home, but on the global platform, it buys a lot, and it continues to buy even more and more and more. Imagine all the currencies of the world being thrown out of an airplane, and some have bricks tied to them, while others have feathers tied to them. And that's the best way to describe domestic versus global. So on a domestic side of it, yeah, they're all dropping. They're all dropping in buying capacity. They're all falling. It's just at the rate that they're falling, in relation to the other currencies. The old feather U.S. dollars floating around up here as this other thing's dropping like crazy. And that gap again gets wider and wider to where our strength here. But again, it's sacrificing production, sacrificing sales. And that's clearly reflective in this longer term trading band. Again, starting at 08, I always talk about these stair steps, but again, starting in 08, it's just a really narrow trading band. And at the same time, you can bank that every time you had a spike, meaning there was extra demand or a shortage, that the CPI followed this up, and the price of your goods just kind of goes up. It doesn't fall near as much, it goes up, doesn't fall very much, goes up, doesn't fall very much, goes up. And pretty soon, you start here, and you just get farther and farther and farther apart as you go across the screen, or across the chart, I should say. And it becomes harder and harder and harder to make your current economic environment work. I only spent a few minutes on this, just Googled, 2017, how many bushels to acres you produce? 176.6, 114.6 billion bushel corn crop, 90.9 million acres with 2 billion bushels being exported for the year. 2020, 14.2, 172 bushels to the acre, 92 million acres with 2.7 billion exports. 2022, 13.7 billion, 173.5, 90 million at a 2.472 billion bushel exports. 2024, 14.98 or 14.9 billion, 179 bushels to the acre. 91.5 million acres. An increase in acres from 2022. But anyway, it doesn't matter. You can see we can go up here, clip to 2025. They're projecting a 3.2 billion bushel exports, which is knocking off some records, but we don't quite know what the final yield's going to be yet. That should come out in January. But the common theme is the acres pretty much stay the same. The exports are increasing a little bit. The billion bushels produced and the average yield, it just kind of all stays the same. And then you wonder, well, why does the corn market fluctuate that much? Well, that's just complete proof that it's on a global scale. It's a global scale. Doesn't matter what happens here. Well, it does, on a global scale, but considering it's pretty consistent, it must not rock the boat much here in the United States. The United States always stays fairly consistent. But things when they come up like the Ukraine, where you take a whole country's production out, or you take a large South American drought, you take a whole country's production out on a global scale. Well, that's where you see the fireworks in the market. And you could probably see if the United States had some major event where you lost large scale production across 30 million acres or something. But anyway, it's pretty consistent, but the price obviously isn't, so that's just proof of the global scale here. On this channel, I'm very critical of Trump. I'm not advocating any political groups on here. I don't care who anybody votes for. It's kind of funny when I bring something up about him, my subscriber count bounces around. I'm hypocritical. I mean, I criticize any political group when they do something that affects ag prices. Even Obama with his ethanol rollbacks and hydraulic fracturing, on down the line. And I thought for the rest of this video I would kind of prove, though, because I always get a lot of pretty pro-Trump viewers, and I've been pretty critical of him, saying they did fuck your markets over. So I thought I would prove it here to you guys for the remainder of the video of kind of what he did and where the markets went. So at least you guys can have literally in-depth documentation here. If you guys have been watching the channel, hopefully you have, because it explains things better. But I always talk about these stair steps in the markets. As you can see, I boxed in the highs, the bottoms, and the tops. This is on soybeans. Usually I just show corn, but this is on soybeans this time. I boxed in the, then in 08, you step up to another stair step, being like the red, from the yellow to the red, step up into another trading range. And that again came at 08 at a time of major currency devaluation. Simply looking up on Google, right there, March 1st, 2018, announced his intentions of the tariffs. This would have been his first term with the first round of trade war and the first things that he applied that started to rock the market. Now, the market wasn't instantaneous. It took a little bit of time here once he said this and implemented it. And you can see on the chart here in front of you what follows. So you can see the dates he applied it, and you can start to see we started to have a little bit of a downtrend line, meaning that they were starting to risk off in the commodities. Then we literally just right around May just totally fell off the chart straight down. That was your tariff adjustment. So if you apply a tariff, it has to tariff adjust. For example, if corn's $4 and there's a 50% tariff, that makes the corn $6, which ultimately means you'd have to have $2 for your corn to be back to the original $4 global price competitive. In other words, to be globally competitive, you have to be much, much cheaper than your competition when factoring in the additional cost of a tariff, which is a tax. And as you can see on this chart, how we were going along as sideways, and then we just notched straight down. So we went from the red brackets down, straight down to the yellow brackets, then went across the screen, across the chart at a lower level, meaning tariff adjusted. And if you look at where we were prior to the tariffs, those prices, we haven't even returned to those prices. So we are still currently sitting below 2016 through 2018 prices. That just explains why guys are in trouble. Again, back to the online chart so we can take a closer look. But we literally have prices moving sideways, straight down, tariff adjusted prices. Otherwise, this probably would have just went straight sideways across your chart. And again, we have not technically really recovered all the way from these original prices. And you can see here again where even more tariffs were applied in the trade war. Again, a big notch down in a slow recovery, and now the market is where they don't quite believe it. I mean, we should have probably been in a little happier zone and maybe moving upwards. So yes, they have hurt you, maybe in more ways than people think, and that's been, I mean, that's deflation right there. That's deflation. Lower prices, that's deflation. At the same time, when you have a growing dollar, and one of the reasons you have a growing or rising dollar is coming back again from Trump's OPEC 2020 plus deal. We talked about the OPEC 2020 deal in previous videos, so I won't totally revisit it, but you can clearly see that right around 2020 and how the OPEC 2020 deal came in, and we shot straight up, a straight up trend, at the peak being around 2022, to where more oil started entering the market and we started coming back down. And that CPI follows that exactly. Now, what happens when that occurs is the Fed's going to put on the brakes, trying to slow inflation, make borrowing money more expensive. That stops new money creation. And since debt is money, that means no new money is being created, so a lesser supply of money usually brings the value of the dollar upward. And you can see that on this dollar index here, when they put the brakes on, how everything went straight up and has basically been up ever since, at a higher level. And that makes exporting harder. That kills off production exporting, beyond agriculture. I mean, like just selling like a piece of machinery out of the country or anything for that fact. That borrowing money's more expensive. So yeah, the tariffs and the backlash out of it, and the inflation trigger, which really was the large part of it, was the OPEC 2020 plus deal. All originated from Trump's first term. So he's not entirely to blame for everything, but you could prove it right there in the charts, looking again at like soybean prices and dollar indexes, and flat out prove that you had a leg down in price, and you had a debt expansion. Hell, he had a debt expansion just giving the farmers a bailout to try to get us back up to these prices, which weren't enough. And as I said, the inflation hangs around. That's why you saw your parts go up. That's why you saw your fertilizer bill goes up. And look what's going on there as well. You get tariffs. You had stuff that's still lingering on. And that's why they're trying to open up the imports again. That's why I've said there is no America first. So they're just now they've switched to let's just get a bunch of cheap crap. But that same mentality is largely what led to the first issues. That's what led to the first problems. We had inflation the first time around. Hell, if you go in here to the Federal Reserve and you look at the Federal Reserve site, you look at the inflation. We were having inflation even back then. But if your soybeans are going over here and then notching down in 18, your soybeans are going this way and then sideways, while everything else was going up. So that gap was just getting wider and wider and wider. And then farmers are seemingly baffled as to why they can't afford things, or can't afford the things they once did, which is reflected in the margins that I showed on those charts from Illinois Farm Docs earlier. And look what's going on now. I mean, you might have a peak here, but the inflation has just kept up and lingered around, probably leveling off. But again, grain went up here, and now the grain's back down in here, and this gap is clear across the screen now. Hell, it used to be back here. That's what I say. It'll be a currency devaluation. The spread just gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse and worse till you can't take it. And one of these days, there'll be another currency devaluation, which will start back over. It's coming. Now, corn obviously wasn't as responsive to the tariffs. You can see we're kind of in a sideways trading band at 18 on. It was pretty parallel lines, and then we're just a little bit higher line going sideways now. But it damn well did react to the OPEC deal. I mean, from here to here, I mean, there's your OPEC deal. So I mean, you can flat out see how it did react to the higher oil markets. And what's Trump doing now? I mean, what did he campaign on? The guy campaigned on "Drill, baby, drill," a Sarah Palin slogan. He campaigned on that. He campaigned on, "I'm going to end this Ukraine war, in 24 hours," which has also been a fail. Why didn't they baby drill? Well, it's because it's below cost of production, and he's trying to make deals of selling extra energy. It's one of the reasons our fertilizers went up. We've had the increases, such as natural gas. He's cut off a lot of renewables at a time where demand's going to be skyrocketing, and he's trying to get this Venezuela deal. I mean, you had flop baby drill was a flop. You had, I'm going to sell this Ukraine thing in 24 hours, and I think it became politically unsavvy to do so. Then obviously neither side was going to give, so that was a flop. So he couldn't really just take the sanctions off that oil floating around the ocean. And now you're seeing this Venezuela thing where he's trying to leverage them out of oil, and trying to get oil companies to go down there, which the oil companies have said no, to which he just is almost shocked, because somehow in his mind, if you have the reserves, you automatically have cheap gasoline. But the oil companies have said no, so now he's almost to the point where he's willing to pay them to go down there. The guy is literally hell-bent on flooding the oil markets and oil industry, and that's what he did the first time. And then once it all blew up in his face, you'll have another big spike. And that's the reason we had that spike, was because of those shortages. And it was more than just the oil spike, but there was other things like the Ukraine Black Sea deal, and then just the sheer amount of printing and everything else. But you're gonna have an upswing here at some point, and then you're probably also gonna have a currency devaluation down the road because of this K-shaped economic recovery that we're in. And a lot of this really comes back on Trump's policy. The things that he's doing, they have whiplash effects. Now, what do you think that those soybean prices? What do you think that they did? When you leg down like that, and you can no longer just go sell something out of your bin, and you're waiting on a government bailout program that may or may not exist, and it's going to be a set amount instead of floating it with the market. What do you think that does for the contractor down the road trying to bulldoze on your property? What do you think it does for your guys selling you a set of tires, your hired help on down the line? It causes economic whiplash effects, hardships, longer lasting things than just the immediate lower market. So that's why I'm very critical, and again can prove it right through a chart. Commodities should be largely more inflation adjusting if there was a continuous increase or a demand story. But when you artificially manipulate markets and want to suppress certain things, it's gonna have a blowback effect, and I think that's what we're gonna be seeing here in the future. So anyway, hope you guys watch this. Eclipses of prior to the 71. A lot of our economic and social problems all stem from that. You take somebody who's got more wealth, maybe tied up in assets that he can borrow against, because that's where the money's flowed once we go into a fiat system, versus some guy just earning a week-to-week paycheck, which is not kept up with inflation. Again, provable by the long-term index here, and very likely if you ran a wage chart under this, it wouldn't reflect it. And you can see it right here, 71, and it's flat, and it just goes over and straight up. Once you got a system where you could just print all the money you wanted, but it leads to sociological things, and sociological things can lead to populism, which is how we got the candidates that we've had, or how Trump was elected. Was populist. It's more of an extremist group from people who are more towards desperation, looking for a solution to solve their problems. So hopefully it's making a little more sense as the series of videos continue. Thanks for watching.